Crystal Wells never imagined that a single sentence could destroy what she thought was a perfectly controlled marriage. But that Thursday evening in their Atlanta suburban home, standing in the living room she'd decorated to impress the neighbors, she looked her husband dead in the eye and said the words that would unravel everything. "Don't scold my daughters, Bradley. Take care of your own." She watched his face change, saw something shift behind his eyes, like a pilot reading instruments before a crash. He stood there frozen, one hand still holding his flight logbook, the other trembling slightly. Good, she thought. Maybe now he'd understand his place in this family hierarchy she'd so carefully constructed. Her voice had been sharp, cold, final. Exactly the tone she used with difficult real estate clients who needed to be reminded who was in charge. At the staircase, her 3 daughters watched the scene unfold. Ashley with folded arms, already 17 and sharp as her mother. Megan clutching the railing, always the sensitive one. And Katie, just 11, watching with those wide eyes that saw everything but understood nothing. For 12 years, Crystal had watched Bradley play house with her children. 12 years of him thinking he could waltz into their lives and become some kind of father figure. The man who fed them breakfast when she was showing properties early, who helped with homework while she networked at real estate events, who drove them to activities while she built her career. He seemed to believe that love could make their blended family whole, but Crystal knew better. Blood was blood, and everything else was just convenience. The room fell silent except for the ceiling fan's rhythmic ticking. Then Ashley, her brilliant eldest daughter, smirked and whispered, "He's speechless, Mom." Crystal felt a surge of maternal pride. At least one of her children understood the natural order of things. Bradley looked like he wanted to defend himself, to remind them of everything he'd done over the years. But his voice seemed to have abandoned him. All he managed was a quiet, "You're right." Then he smiled, not the defeated smile she expected, but something else, something that made her stomach flutter with unexpected unease. "That's what I thought," Crystal said, crossing her arms. She'd won this argument like she won everything else, through superior positioning and strategic timing. What she didn't realize was that Bradley's smile wasn't surrender. It was the expression of a man who'd just received his flight plan for departure. That night, Bradley disappeared, and by the time Crystal realized what she'd actually accomplished with her words, the damage was already irreversible. Please, before I continue this fascinating tale of consequences, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more stories about what happens when pride meets reality. Crystal stood in the middle of their carefully appointed living room, evening light filtering through the designer curtains she'd selected to complement the hardwood floors. The house was her masterpiece, every detail chosen to project success, stability, the image of a woman who had everything under control. The reality TV show continued playing on their 75-inch television, but no one was watching anymore. She could feel the weight of victory settling around her shoulders like her favorite cashmere shawl. Finally, she'd made her position clear. Bradley needed to understand that this wasn't his house. These weren't his children, and this certainly wasn't his domain to rule with his quiet, persistent authority. "You heard me," she repeated, each word carefully modulated for maximum impact. "Don't scold my daughters. Take care of your own." The phrase felt delicious on her tongue. After years of watching him try to parent children who would never truly be his, she'd finally drawn the line in the permanent marker. Behind her, Ashley maintained her perfect posture, arms folded in an exact mirror of her mother's stance. The girl had inherited Crystal's gift for reading power dynamics. Megan seemed uncertain, but she'd learn. Katie was too young to understand the adult complexity of what had just happened, but that was fine. The lesson would sink in over time. Crystal had always been proud of her ability to manage situations. In real estate, she was known for her skill at handling difficult negotiations, for knowing exactly when to apply pressure and when to pull back. Marriage, she'd discovered, operated on similar principles. You established dominance early and maintained it through strategic deployments of consequence and reward. Bradley's confusion was almost amusing. For a moment, he just stared at her with those steady pilot eyes, as if he was trying to process some kind of navigation error. Good. Let him be confused. Let him realize that 12 years of playing house didn't grant him actual authority over her children. "Crystal," he said quietly, Do you even hear yourself?" She rolled her eyes with practiced disdain. "Bradley, please don't start. You always think you can correct my children. They're not your cadets." The military reference was deliberate. She knew how he bristled when she diminished his aviation background, reducing his professional expertise to mere workplace habits. "No, they're not," he agreed, his voice carrying that infuriating calm that had driven her crazy for years. "But they're supposed to be our children, our home." Ashley's chuckle was perfectly timed, a small sound of derision that cut through Bradley's earnestness like a blade. Crystal felt another surge of pride. Her daughters understood loyalty. They knew which side their bread was buttered on. "Don't raise your voice at them," Crystal snapped, though Bradley hadn't raised his voice at all. The accusation was tactical. It painted him as the aggressor, her as the protector. "You always act like their father. You're not." There it was. The truth she'd been building toward for months, maybe years. The final establishment of the hierarchy that had always existed, but that Bradley had been too naive to acknowledge. These were her children, her house, her life. He was just the pilot she'd married for stability and financial security. Bradley's face went very still. She watched something cold settle behind his expression, something that reminded her uncomfortably of the way he looked when he was studying weather patterns before a difficult flight, calculating, measuring, planning. "Take care of your own," she repeated, softer now, but no less final. Bradley nodded slowly. "You're right." His agreement should have felt like complete victory. Instead, Crystal felt that strange flutter again, as if she'd just signed a contract without reading the fine print. The room went completely quiet. Even the television seemed to hush itself in recognition of the moment. Bradley turned toward the hallway, his movements deliberate and controlled. His hand brushed against the wall where their family photos hung, studio portraits she'd commissioned to project the image of domestic success. "Bradley," she called as he reached the corridor. "Where are you going?" He didn't look back. "To do exactly what you said." The words should have been satisfying. They should have represented her complete triumph in this domestic negotiation. Instead, they landed in her chest with the weight of something she couldn't quite identify. Something that felt suspiciously like the moment when you realize you've made a terrible mistake in a business deal, but the contracts are already signed and the consequences are already in motion. Crystal didn't sleep well that night, though she told herself it was just the excitement of finally establishing proper boundaries. She lay in their king-sized bed, listening to the house settle around her, waiting for the familiar sound of Bradley's truck pulling into the driveway. He'd taken these little dramatic exits before, usually after she'd had to correct his overstepping with the children, but he always came back within a few hours, tail between his legs and ready to apologize. By midnight, she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Let him sit in his truck somewhere, thinking about what she'd said. Let him realize that 12 years of playing provider didn't give him the right to discipline children who weren't his blood. The lesson would do him good. By 2 a.m., she was checking her phone. No messages, no missed calls. The silence should have felt like victory, but instead it carried an odd weight, like the moment before turbulence hits a flight. She pushed the feeling aside. Bradley was probably at his friend Shane's house, drinking beer and complaining about women who didn't appreciate good men. Men were so predictable in their wounded pride. When she woke up that Friday morning, the bed beside her was still empty and perfectly made. Crystal felt the first stirring of something that might have been concern, but she quickly transformed it into irritation. How dare he worry her with this childish behavior? She had houses to show, clients to impress, a reputation to maintain in the competitive Atlanta real estate market. "Girls," she called as she made coffee, "your father will be back this evening. Don't worry about him." The word father felt strategic on her tongue. Let them remember who their real parent was, who had been there from the beginning, who would be there when Bradley finally grew up and accepted his place in the family hierarchy. Ashley came downstairs first, already dressed in her private school uniform, hair perfectly styled in the way Crystal had taught her. "Mom, his flight bag is gone, and his uniforms." There was something in her daughter's voice that Crystal couldn't quite identify. Not worry exactly, but a sharpness that reminded her uncomfortably of her own calculating nature. "So?" Crystal shrugged, though something cold moved through her chest. "He's probably picked up a last-minute charter flight. You know how impulsive pilots can be. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Bradley never took charters without telling her. He was methodical about his schedule, professional about his commitments. It was one of the things that had initially attracted her to him: his reliability, his steady income, his potential as a provider for her and her children. Megan appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale and uncertain. "Mom, I found this on his pillow." She held out a white envelope, Crystal's name written across it in Bradley's precise handwriting. Crystal's hands trembled slightly as she tore it open. Inside was a single sentence, written in the same careful script. "Take care of your own. Nothing more. No explanation, no apology, no timeline for return, just her words." Reflected back at her like an echo in an empty hangar. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the Italian tile she'd chosen so carefully. Hot liquid splashed across her designer robe, but she barely noticed. The note felt heavier than paper should, weighted with implications she wasn't ready to process. "What does it mean?" Katie asked, appearing at her mother's elbow with the wide-eyed innocence that usually melted Crystal's heart. But this morning, even her youngest daughter's sweetness couldn't penetrate the cold realization settling in Crystal's stomach. "It means he's being dramatic," Crystal said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Clean up this coffee, Ashley. I have a showing at 10. But as she stood in the shower 20 minutes later, hot water cascading over her shoulders, Crystal couldn't shake the memory of Bradley's face when he'd agreed with her. That calm acceptance, that strange smile. She'd seen him handle emergency situations before. The time their neighbor's tree fell on the power lines, the night Katie had fallen down the stairs and needed stitches. Bradley never panicked. He assessed, planned, and executed with the methodical precision of someone trained to handle crisis situations. What if this wasn't panic? What if this was planning? The thought followed her through her morning routine, through the careful application of makeup designed to project success and confidence, through the selection of a power suit that commanded respect in rooms full of alpha personalities. By the time she reached her first appointment, Crystal had almost convinced herself that Bradley would be home when she returned, ready to apologize and resume their normal dynamic. Her client that morning was a corporate executive relocating from Chicago, the kind of high-net-worth individual who expected immediate attention and flawless service. Normally, Crystal excelled at these interactions, using her natural charm and strategic intelligence to guide clients toward premium properties with maximum commission potential. But today, she found herself distracted, checking her phone between rooms, her smile feeling forced and brittle. When the client asked about the neighborhood's aviation noise, they were looking at properties near the airport approach path. Crystal heard herself say, "Oh, you get used to it. My husband's a pilot, and he says you stop noticing planes after a while." The present tense felt wrong in her mouth, but she couldn't bring herself to correct it. Because correcting it would mean acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted, that her carefully constructed domestic arrangement might not be as stable as she'd believed. By lunch, she'd managed to schedule 3 more showings and close a deal on a townhouse in Buckhead. Professional success usually energized her, made her feel powerful and in control. But today, each achievement felt hollow, overshadowed by the growing certainty that Bradley's absence wasn't temporary. When she finally returned home that evening, the house felt different, quieter. Not peaceful, but empty in a way that made her footsteps echo against the high ceilings she'd insisted on during their renovation. The girls were doing homework in their rooms, the domestic routine continuing without the steady presence that had anchored it for over a decade. Crystal stood in the kitchen, looking at the space where Bradley usually prepped dinner while she returned calls and emails. For the first time, she noticed how much of their evening rhythm had depended on his quiet efficiency, his anticipation of needs she'd never had to articulate because he'd simply handled them. 1 week stretched into 2, and Crystal found herself living in a strange liminal space between denial and dawning horror. She told her neighbors that Bradley was on an extended charter assignment. She informed the girls' schools that their father was traveling for work. She even managed to convince her sister during their weekly phone call that everything was perfectly normal, though something in her voice must have betrayed her, because Linda kept asking if she was feeling well. But at night, alone in the bed that suddenly felt enormous, Crystal stared at the ceiling and replayed that Thursday evening conversation on an endless loop. She analyzed every word, every gesture, every flicker of expression that had crossed Bradley's face. What bothered her most wasn't his absence. It was how prepared he'd seemed for it. The man she'd married 12 years ago had been wonderfully predictable. He followed schedules, maintained routines, communicated his plans with the thoroughness of someone trained in aviation protocols. This sudden disappearance wasn't characteristic of the Bradley she knew, which meant either she'd never really known him at all, or she'd pushed him past some invisible threshold she hadn't realized existed. The third week, the cracks in her carefully maintained facade began to show. Ashley found her crying in the laundry room, holding one of Bradley's uniform shirts. "Mom?" Her daughter's voice carried an uncertainty that Crystal had never heard before. "Are you sure he's coming back?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Crystal looked at her eldest daughter, so sharp, so perceptive, so much like herself, and realized she couldn't maintain the pretense anymore. "I don't know," she admitted, the words feeling like stones in her throat. That afternoon, Crystal did something she'd never done in her 12-year marriage. She snooped. She went through Bradley's home office with the systematic thoroughness of a crime scene investigator, looking for clues about where he might have gone, what he might have planned. Bank statements, flight logs, email accounts, anything that might explain how a man could simply vanish without a trace. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The joint checking account they had used for household expenses had been systematically drained over the past 6 months, transferred in small amounts that she'd never noticed, because Bradley had always handled the financial details. The savings account she'd assumed contained their emergency fund was completely empty. Even the automatic deposits from his airline salary had been redirected to an account she couldn't access. Crystal sat in Bradley's chair, surrounded by evidence of months of careful planning, and felt something she'd never experienced before: the complete dissolution of control. She'd built her entire adult life around the ability to manage situations, to anticipate and manipulate outcomes. But Bradley had been playing a game she didn't even know existed, and he'd been winning for months. The phone rang, startling her from her discovery. Shane's name appeared on the caller ID. Bradley's friend from the freight company, the one who'd always been. Politely distant during the few times they had met socially, Crystal grabbed the phone with desperate eagerness. "Shane, have you seen Bradley? Do you know where he is?" There was a long pause before Shane's careful voice replied. "Mrs. Wells, I think you should stop looking for him." The words hit her like a slap. "What do you mean, stop looking? He's my husband. I have a right to know where he is." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I think you lost that right when you told him to take care of his own." Shane's voice was gentle but implacable. "Bradley's a good man, maybe the best man I know, but you broke something in him that night, and I don't think it can be fixed." Crystal's hands shook as she held the phone. I was establishing boundaries. I was protecting my children." "From what?" Shane's question was quiet, but it carried the weight of years of observation. From a man who got up at 5 every morning to make their breakfast, who never missed a parent, conference, or a dance recital, who worked double shifts to pay for Ashley's private school and Megan's dance classes and Katie's art supplies. Each word landed like a physical blow. Crystal had always known these things intellectually, but she'd framed them as Bradley's duty, his contribution to the household economy. She'd never considered them as acts of love, because love, in her experience, was supposed to be dramatic and conditional and earned through proper behavior. "Shane," she whispered, "I need to know he's okay." "He's more than okay, Mrs. Wells. He's free." The line went dead, leaving Crystal alone with the crushing weight of what she'd destroyed. That evening, she gathered her daughters in the living room, the same room where her words had started this catastrophic chain of events. Ashley sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Megan perched on the edge of the sofa, already crying before Crystal said anything. Katie curled up in the chair that had always been Bradley's, her small body looking lost in the space he'd occupied. "Girls," Crystal began, her voice carefully controlled, "I need to tell you something about your father." The word felt foreign now, heavy with meaning she'd tried so hard to deny. "He might not be coming back." Ashley's laugh was sharp and bitter, so much like Crystal's own that it was startling. "We figured that out weeks ago, Mom. The question is, what are you going to do about it? For the first time in her adult life, Crystal Wells had absolutely no answer. She'd spent so many years managing and manipulating and maneuvering that she'd forgotten how to simply ask for forgiveness. And now, facing the consequences of her need for control, she realized she might have destroyed the one thing that had actually held her carefully constructed world together. Outside, an airplane passed overhead, its engines fading into the distance like a dream of something she'd never quite managed to understand before it was too late to learn. Crystal hired Wade Coleman on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 weeks after Bradley's disappearance had transformed from inconvenience to crisis. The private investigator sat across from her in the living room, where her world had first started unraveling, his notepad balanced on his knee, his expression professionally neutral as she explained the situation with careful omissions. "So, your husband left after an argument," Wade summarized, his pen hovering over the page. "No note, no forwarding address, no contact since then." "There was a note," Crystal admitted reluctantly. She'd thrown it away after memorizing every letter, but she could still recite it word for word. It just said, "Take care of your own, that's all." Wade's eyebrows rose slightly. Those were his exact words? Crystal felt heat creep up her neck. They were actually my words from our argument. The admission felt like swallowing broken glass. I told him to take care of his own instead of disciplining my daughters. The investigator's pen stopped moving entirely. He looked at her with the expression of someone reassessing the entire situation. "Mrs. Wells, I have to ask, are you looking for your husband because you're worried about his safety, or because you want to undo something you said?" The question cut deep because it forced Crystal to examine motivations she'd been avoiding for weeks. What did she want? Bradley back in their neat suburban home, resuming his role as the reliable provider who asked for nothing more than basic respect, an apology that would restore her sense of control over her domestic universe, or something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to actual remorse? "I need to know he's okay," she said finally, which was true but not complete. Wade nodded and spent the next week doing what Crystal should have done months earlier, paying attention. He tracked credit card usage, interviewed Bradley's colleagues, followed paper trails that Crystal had ignored, because managing money had always been Bradley's responsibility. When he returned the following Tuesday, he carried a manila envelope that felt heavier than its contents should have warranted. "Your husband didn't disappear, Mrs. Wells," Wade said, sliding photographs across her coffee table. "He relocated, and based on what I found, he's been planning this move for at least 8 months. Crystal stared at the images with growing disbelief. Bradley stood beside a construction site, wearing a hard hat and safety vest, shaking hands with men in business suits. A sign in the background read, "Skyline Aviation Group, future home of Horizon Heights Estate." In another photo, he was pointing at architectural blueprints, his expression focused and confident in a way Crystal hadn't seen in years. "He started the company last spring," Wade continued, consulting his notes. "Small at first, charter flights, cargo. Runs, some contract work for regional airlines. But the real investment went into the property development. He purchased 63 acres outside Gainesville through a series of shell companies. Smart man, made sure nothing could be traced back to your joint assets." Crystal's hands trembled as she examined each photograph. This wasn't the Bradley she knew, the quiet, accommodating man who deferred to her judgment on everything from vacation destinations to dinner menus. This was someone else entirely, someone with vision and ambition and the patience to execute long-term plans without her knowledge or input. "The timeline is interesting," Wade added, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "His first business registration was filed 3 days after you told him he couldn't discipline Ashley for staying out past curfew. Remember that night in March, when you said he had no authority over children who weren't his blood?" Crystal remembered. She'd been proud of herself. That night, pleased with how clearly she'd established boundaries. She'd thought Bradley's quiet acceptance meant he understood and agreed with her position. Now she realized his silence had been strategic, the moment he'd started planning his exit. "Where is he living?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "He built himself a house on the property. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, simple design, but it's completely off-grid, solar-powered, private airstrip for his planes." Wade's tone was admiring, despite his professional neutrality. "Mrs. Wells, your husband has essentially created his own small kingdom out there. He's not hiding. He's just living somewhere you can't reach him." The photographs felt like evidence of her own blindness. For 12 years, she'd shared a bed with this man, managed household finances with him, raised children in his presence, and somehow missed the fact that he was capable of conceiving and executing a plan of this magnitude. She'd reduced him to a supporting character in her own story, never realizing he'd been writing his own narrative all along. Is there anyone else? The question emerged before Crystal could stop herself, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Wade shook his head. "No indication of that. From what I can tell, he's focused entirely on his business and his property development. He's hired local contractors, established relationships with aviation companies, even started a scholarship program for kids interested in pilot training." He paused, studying Crystal's expression. "Mrs. Wells, I have to tell you, the people I interviewed spoke about him with genuine respect. They see him as someone who keeps his word, treats his employees well, pays his bills on time. He's built quite a reputation in just 6 months." Crystal closed her eyes, trying to reconcile this information with the man she thought she'd known. The Bradley in these photographs looked confident, successful, content, all the things she'd somehow convinced herself he could never be without her guidance and management. "There's one more thing," Wade said, hesitating. "He left instructions with his lawyer. If you or the girls ever need anything, medical emergencies, educational expenses, that kind of thing, there's a fund set up. You just have to ask." Even in his freedom, Bradley was still taking care of them. The realization hit Crystal like a physical blow, leaving her gasping for breath she couldn't seem to find. Crystal's reckoning came on a Saturday afternoon in December at Brookhaven Prep Academy's annual aviation career day. She'd been dreading the event for weeks, but Ashley had insisted they attend. "It's important for my college applications," her daughter had said, though Crystal suspected Ashley's motives were more complex than academic advancement. Standing at the gates of the prestigious private school, Crystal adjusted her designer sunglasses and tried to project the confidence that had once come naturally, but 6 months of Bradley's absence had worn away her protective coating of superiority. The other parents milling around the entrance looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity, the wife whose pilot husband had simply vanished one day. "Mrs. Wells," called Jennifer Morrison, one of the PTA mothers who had always competed with Crystal for social dominance. "Flying solo today?" The pun was deliberate and cruel, designed to highlight Crystal's new status as a woman whose husband had found her sufficiently unbearable to abandon. "Bradley's working," Crystal replied with forced brightness, though the lie felt increasingly hollow each time she used it. "You know how dedicated he is to his aviation career." Jennifer's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Oh, how funny. I could have sworn I saw him earlier. By the main pavilion, actually. Something about a corporate sponsorship?" She tilted her head with false concern. "You didn't come together?" The world shifted sideways. Crystal felt her carefully maintained composure crack like ice under pressure. "That's impossible," she managed to say, though her voice sounded distant and strange. But Jennifer was already pointing toward the main courtyard, where a large banner stretched between 2 trees. "Proudly sponsored by Skyline Aviation Group, building tomorrow's pilots today." Beneath the banner stood Bradley, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, speaking confidently to a group of parents and faculty members. Crystal's legs nearly gave out. The man she was looking at bore only superficial resemblance to the quiet, deferential husband she'd dismissed 6 months earlier. This Bradley stood with his shoulders back, his head high, radiating the kind of natural authority she'd spent years trying to undermine. His smile was genuine, his gestures confident, his entire presence commanding the kind of respect she'd always believed belonged only to her. "Excuse me," Crystal whispered, pushing through the crowd toward the pavilion like a moth drawn to flame. Each step brought her closer to the magnitude of her miscalculation, the scope of what she'd thrown away in her arrogance. Bradley was in the middle of explaining a scholarship program when he noticed her approach. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Crystal saw something in his gaze that made her stomach clench. Polite indifference. Not anger, not hurt, not even satisfaction. just the bland courtesy one might show a stranger. As I was saying, Bradley continued, his voice steady through the portable microphone, education and respect form the foundation of everything worthwhile in aviation. Without both, even the most skilled pilot will eventually crash. The word respect hung in the air like an accusation, though his tone remained professionally neutral. Crystal stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, watching her former husband command the attention and admiration of everyone present. Parents hung on his words. Faculty members nodded approvingly. Even the students seemed genuinely engaged by his presentation about flight training and career opportunities. When Bradley finished speaking, the applause was enthusiastic and prolonged. Crystal watched him shake hands with the principal, accept business cards from interested parents, and pose for photos with students. He moved through these interactions with the easy confidence of someone who'd found his proper altitude. Then came the moment that shattered what remained of Crystal's composure. Katie, now 12 and approaching adolescence with her mother's sharp awareness, broke away from Ashley and Megan and ran toward the pavilion. "Daddy!" she called, her voice carrying across the courtyard with unmistakable joy. "Daddy, you came!" Bradley's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and painful and infinitely tender. He knelt to catch. Katie in his arms, holding her tight while his eyes closed against emotions Crystal couldn't begin to fathom. Ashley and Megan followed more hesitantly, but soon all three girls were clustered around their father, tears streaming down their faces. The crowd watched this reunion with a kind of uncomfortable fascination reserved for witnessing someone else's private pain made public. Crystal heard whispers, saw pointing fingers, felt the weight of speculation and judgment settling around her shoulders like a lead blanket. Bradley spoke quietly to each of his daughters, his words too soft for Crystal to hear, but carrying enough love to make Katie sob harder. When he finally stood, his eyes found Crystal's once more across the diminishing distance between them. "Hello, Crystal," he said politely, as if greeting a casual acquaintance. "You look well?" The banality of it was devastating. No anger, no dramatics, no passionate confrontation, just distant civility from the man she'd once controlled so completely. "Bradley," she managed, though his name felt foreign on her tongue. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I sponsor the program now," he explained, his tone remaining carefully neutral. "These kids deserve every opportunity to pursue their dreams." He paused, glancing at their daughters. "All of them do." That evening, alone in the house that had once felt like her domain, Crystal finally understood the true scope of her defeat. She'd spent months telling herself that Bradley needed her, that he'd eventually realize his mistake and return to the life she'd so carefully orchestrated for him. But watching him at the school, seeing the respect in people's eyes, witnessing the love her daughters still felt for the man she'd driven away, Crystal realized she'd been fighting the wrong battle all along. She hadn't lost a husband, she'd lost a partner whose quiet strength had been holding her world together while she'd been too arrogant to notice. And now, finally understanding what she'd destroyed, Crystal Wells sat in her empty house and experienced the peculiar satisfaction of getting exactly what she'd asked for.